Blue Future Trunks is an incredibly consistent tempo deck with a varying amount of options to deal with any situation. And with that in mind, here is my competitive list for the release of Dragon Ball Fusion World. For any of you interested on the deck list, here it is. But if you'd like the further card breakdown, make sure to stick around. In general, the list is very low to the ground, utilizing Blue's ability to consistently reuse resources and in some cases infinitely loop the amount of combo power you can utilize to be able to accrue advantage and overcome your opponent. Everything kicks off with the leader, and honestly, it is one of my favorite leaders. Trunks is likely going to be one of my mains looking into the release of the game. On the front side, he's just a typical draw leader. On the awakened side, though, comes with a ton of utility. Typical 20k when attacking draw card, but has an activate main once per turn. Choose up to one battle card with cost of 3 or less and return it to the owner's hand. This is extremely powerful when you also consider that you can bounce your own cards. So if you need the tempo or need to get rid of a problematic card on your opponent's board, you can get rid of that. However, you can also utilize it on your own to be able to reuse attackers, reuse on play abilities, or just have more combo power in your hand after you've drawn a card or attacked with a card. It's an ability that serves extremely well for the type of playstyle that is in Fusion World, and one that will probably have a lot of longevity. In being a blue leader, though, there is an elephant in the room that we need to talk about, and it's Peel Off. This one drop is so incredibly powerful that it actually warps blue builds up until something ever gets done with it, most likely. It is a one drop 5k, which is not much on its own, but it's a 10k combo that also has non-play ability if you have 7 or fewer cards in your hand, at up to one card with a cost of 1 or less, and Earthling in its special traits from your drop to your hand. Very specifically, Peel Off is an Earthling. So this means that he can also target himself, because there's no restriction on the card, to infinitely loop himself back. And then when you consider that you can do that with extra cards and with other one drops that have other abilities, you are creating this very incredibly consistent engine that just repeats over and over again, which is even more powerful in Trunks when you consider the fact that you can bounce Peel Off back to your hand. And this is where I have a bit of a warning. There is a realistic reality where at some point in the longevity of this game, Peel Off gets hit in some manner and it'll shift how blue plays out. So if you're going into this deck, do so with the understanding that potentially at some point this card will be changed and you'll might have to change up your build. But until that happens, this card is incredibly powerful and there's no reason for us not to build our blue decks around optimizing being able to use it. In that regard, what are our targets? Now it is just one drops, so it is a little bit restrictive, but nevertheless one drops can be incredibly powerful cards. In that regard, we have Peel Off himself, because of course we got that infinite loop going, but then we have Pan, on play, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards from your hand, sets up your drop, fixes up your clunky hands if you have too many extra cards, what have you. Pan is a great way to be able to kind of get some additional recursion on that front. If you just need a straight draw, we have Trunks, and then there's a Final Hope Slash, which is an incredibly powerful extra card. 1 cost, activate battle your turn, choose your leader or up to 1 of your battle cards and get 20k power for the battle. Then choose up to 1 battle card with a cost of 2 or less and return it to its owner's hand, which again can be your own or can be your opponent's to be able to push for tempo. Did your opponent not block with their blocker? Well, back to the hand it goes, and now I can attack with something else. And the important thing is that on the awakened side, it means that our leader can push for 40k, which is huge because, like with a lot of my deck builds as we're leading up to the release of the game, I expect a very green heavy meta. So being able to swing into the echelons of 35-40k means that you can apply pressure and force cards out of green players' hands. Moving on from that, naturally Trunks is a leader that wants to be awakened as early as possible. Most leaders do, but especially Trunks because of the power of the utility of his backside. In that regard, we have the best awakener in the game in the one drop My Future SR. It's a 5k combo, which isn't phenomenal, but on play, add up to 2 cards from your life to your hand, which already on its own is probably good enough for it to see play. But on top of that, it has an auto once per turn. If you have 7 or fewer cards in your hand, when an opponent's battle card is returned to their hand by one of your skills, draw 1 card. So we can bounce our own cards to be able to reuse them and get advantage that way. Or if we bounce our opponent's cards, we'll draw a card, which is incredibly powerful. And something to note, if you have 2 Mai's on board, the conditional on Mai only cares about the trigger timing. So even if you have 6, you'll draw 1 from the first Mai, you will draw to 8 with the second Mai, because of the way the timing works, which is awesome. And then from there, we just move on to the other Gotens and Trunks, which are usually the base of most blue decks. Goten being able to bounce a card, which is good for tempo. Trunks being a 25k attacker, which is good against bigger bodies. And then finally, the blocker Trunks, which just gives us a little flexibility. We don't lean on it too hard, but having a little bit of flex and having some blockers is nice. We're not all in, though, on our leader doing all the work. This isn't necessarily a Goku Black build, which if you guys want to check that out, we'll have a deck profile for that soon, so subscribe down below. But we do want some of our blue cards, which are incredibly powerful, to do some work on their end as well. So in regards to our mid-range, We have the 25k Vegeta, end your turn if you have 7 or fewer cards in your hand, switch this card to active mode. Very annoying because our opponents can't deal with it unless they use direct removal. And it's at 25k, which is super important if you're ever going to face against Broly's. If you're going to face into a Gohan, now you only need a 10k to be able to swing into his 35k body. Very relevant. In that same note, we got Gohan, swings for 35k, really hard to complain there. And then Piccolo, we run a lot of extra cards, a lot that are very useful, but also a lot that we might look to cycle away with, say, Pan very early on. Piccolo is able to get that back, and now we're getting even more infinite recursion with our card. In that regard, there's not only the Sword of Hope, but also there's Galagun, a 15k that draws a card, can't complain there. Final Flash, which we don't run a ton of, but it's just good to have that 5-drop removal if ever we're going to have to deal with a ramp deck that uses 5-drop Goku. Being able to get rid of it is pretty key. And then finally, Sinister Sickle, which you get to choose up to 2 of your opponent's battle cards with cost of 4 or less, and a bottom deck this. We run this at 2, an incredibly powerful card that if your opponent doesn't play around it, can completely shift the tempo of the game to your side. Finally, we will have a pair of Vegetas. I just think a powerful double striker is something that you really don't want to be missing. This deck has so much consistency in being able to have big singular swings, utilizing the peel-off loop, utilizing Sword of Hope and Galaguns and stuff like that, that I don't think it's absolutely necessary. But like anything, having the option to be able to close out the game in double strike as well as remove a 4 or less is something that's very much welcome. Now, I have a couple of cards that I have in the deck that are more so testing to kind of understand how well do they do. Conceptually, they could do well, but it all depends on where the meta positions itself. And if we're somewhere where red is really strong or quick pressure decks maybe, they don't do so well. The first one is Bulma, and already being a 1-drop 5k that is intended to stick on the board. If you're playing up against Beerus or any red deck, that's really bad. But against green, she might survive a couple of turns potentially, so there's some value there. She has an activate main. Once per turn, you have 7 or fewer cards in your hand. During this turn, the next time you would use an extra card from your hand, reduce the cost by 1 blue, which means our Sword of Hopes are free, our Galaguns are free, and then if you're looping those infinitely with peel off, it kind of gets that loop going. It's very, very strong, assuming she stays on board. She's an extremely strong ability, but she's extremely removable. So in that regard, there could be games where she completely takes over because your opponent never sees their removal. But there's also games where she actually does nothing. But at the very least, if you play her the turn you intend to play the extra card, you're getting a free usage of the extra card, and then your opponent wastes removal on her. So you could get that usage. It's not terrible. Just make sure you line it up appropriately. But I'm not sold on it being consistently in a deck, which is kind of why it's at a 2 of. On the other end of that spectrum, it's more so about understanding if there's utility in having the Trunks Future SR in the deck. 3 cost, 20k on play, add 1 card from your life to your hand, then choose up to 1 battle card with cost of 5 or less and return to his hand. If it went to the bottom of the deck, it would be 100% to be guaranteed be part of everything we're trying to do. The fact that it goes back to hand, it means what are you really hitting, right? So you have to consider double strikers. I guess opposing double strikers are good, but opposing double strikers have really strong on plays if we're looking at red and blue, but it is good against yellow because they don't get that benefit. But it is a tempo play, so you're forcing your opponent to have to commit 5 energy to their next turn if they get to there, or it could do you even less than that. But right at the high roll, we're hitting the 5 drops. We could bounce back the ramp Goku, but then they could just play it again. But maybe you can then apply pressure in a way that they need to blow up their energy in a way that they don't get it back. I'm not entirely sure, but I do like the flexibility that's a 20k attacker, so it can actually potentially damage your opponent. It's pseudo removal. It's not amazing, but it's something I think worth testing and trying out to see how well it does. And it's a flexible enough card that it should at least never be dead in your hand, which is kind of what I'm going for cards that I'm not entirely sure about, but at least I want to experiment and play with. But even with that caveat of having a couple of cards where, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not 100% sure about, I think this deck is incredibly strong and a good contender for not only the ladder experience, but even tournament experiences like that. It's kind of doing what the Goku Black crit deck is wanting to do, but opening up and not being so strong to that strategy because our leader's much more flexible, awakens incredibly quickly, and puts our opponent in a position where they can never really establish board. We're not ignoring their board. We can outright just deal with it, which is really good in terms of being able to make sure we can keep applying pressure. There are a lot of ways to take blue. For some people, the peel off package might not be it, but I think the infinite value you get from it makes it too strong to not at least consider building out your blue decks with it. But because you can build out otherwise, I'm sure there are other builds. So if you guys have a different way that you would like to build the peel off deck, let me know down below. And with that, I'll catch you guys on the next one.